let us begin slowly, gently, as though settling into a quiet story told beside a low fire. The story of dogs, after all, is not one of sudden explosions or rapid change. It is a story of patience, of slow approaches across ice and dark nights, of curiosity and caution balanced over thousands of years. It is the story of how two species, one human and one wolf, drew ever closer until their lives became inseparable. When we speak of the evolution of dogs, we are really speaking of one of the most extraordinary partnerships in the history of life on Earth. Other animals have been domesticated, some animals have been tamed for food, for labour or for clothing. But dogs are different. Dogs do not merely serve. Dogs live beside us, sharing not just our fires, but our hearts, our families and our journeys. No other creature has so thoroughly rewired its destiny to align with our own. So, in this long and gentle telling, let us walk together through the ages, exploring step by step how wolves became dogs, how wildness softened into companionship, and how human survival became forever intertwined with the loyalty of an animal we still call man's best friend. Imagine now, if you will, a world long before the word dog existed, long before villages or farms or cities. Let us place ourselves tens of thousands of years ago, in the deep chill of the Ice Age. The air is cold and the earth is harsh. Vast sheets of ice stretch across much of the northern hemisphere. Where the ice relents, endless plains of frozen grasslands stretch outward, dotted with woolly mammoths, great herds of bison, and reindeer moving slowly across the tundra. Humans live in small groups, hunters and gatherers who survive by moving with the seasons, following the animals, gathering roots and berries, and keeping warm beside fires of wood and bone. And in this same landscape, moving silently over snow and shadow, there are wolves, the ancestors of dogs. These wolves are not yet our companions. They are powerful hunters, living in close-knit packs, coordinated in ways that few other animals can match. They howl to the night sky, warning rivals, calling to one another across valleys. To humans, they are both fearsome competitors and intriguing neighbours. Wolves hunt the same prey as we do, often faster and more efficient. To the people of the Ice Age, wolves are both rivals and models. They demonstrate how cooperation can bring down great prey. But there is something more, something subtle, something that would, over the long ages, change the future of both species forever. Wolves are curious. They're intelligent. And like humans, they live in families, with bonds of care, loyalty and protection. Perhaps it was this similarity, this strange reflection of ourselves in another creature, that opened the first door. It is in these ancient encounters, thousands of years ago, that the long journey of domestication began. At first, the relationship was not one of friendship. Wolves and humans circled one another warily. Around camps, scraps of food, bones, or discarded remains might draw wolves near. The bravest or most desperate wolves might linger at the edge of human fires, not too close, but not so far as to starve. Humans in turn may have tolerated these animals. A wolf nearby might warn of approaching predators. A wolf lingering close might keep away other scavengers. It was, perhaps, a reluctant bargain at first, born of necessity and chance. Yet over generations, the boldest wolves who could stomach human presence survived longer. And the humans who tolerated their nearness began to notice something. These animals could be useful. The earliest stages of dog evolution were not marked by sudden transformations, but by slow shifts across thousands of years. Wolves with slightly smaller teeth, slightly gentler dispositions and slightly less fear of humans had a better chance of finding scraps, surviving winters, and raising pups. In turn, those pups, exposed to humans from birth, grew more accustomed to their strange two-legged neighbours. Without anyone quite realising it, a new kind of wolf was slowly taking shape. But before we dive further into this delicate transformation, let us linger still in the world before dogs, in the vast Ice Age wilderness where all this began. For it is only by imagining this world that we can understand the enormity of what was to come. Across the frozen plains, humans depended on cooperation. Small tribes had to work together to track and hunt enormous animals. They were vulnerable to lions, cave bears, and other predators far larger than themselves. Survival was not guaranteed, and yet somehow they endured. It is tempting to imagine that in those long, cold nights, as fires flickered and shadows danced, humans looked out into the darkness and heard the echoing howl of wolves. It is tempting to imagine that in that shared music across the ice, a connection was already stirring. This was a world defined by uncertainty. Food could vanish in a season. Winters could be long and merciless. To survive meant adaptation, and humans were already the great adapters of the animal kingdom. It would not be long before they realised that another creature could adapt alongside them. The path ahead, from wolf to dog, would be slow, uncertain and full of quiet steps forward. But it would also be the beginning of a story unlike any other. The story of two species choosing, across thousands of years, not merely to live side by side, but to live together. And so, as we continue this journey, let us move slowly, step by step, through the long corridors of time and watch as wolves, fierce hunters of the Ice Age, slowly begin their transformation into companions, guardians, and friends. Long before anything we would call a dog padded along a human trail, there were other animals, ancient carnivores who roamed landscapes that looked nothing like ours. To understand how dogs came to exist, we must drift backward in time, far beyond the last Ice Age, beyond the camps of early humans, and even beyond the great wolves themselves. We must go back tens of millions of years to when the ancestors of wolves first began to take shape. Imagine a world around 40 million years ago. Forests stretched widely, and small mammals scurried through underbrush. Among them lived a creature known to paleontologists as miasis. It was not quite a wolf, not quite a dog, but something small and weasel-like, with a long body, short legs, and a tail that helped it balance as it moved from branch to branch or across the forest floor. This little animal is considered one of the earliest carnivores in the evolutionary line that would eventually give rise to canines. It hunted insects, small birds, and other tiny creatures, never knowing it would one day be counted as an ancestor of one of humanity's closest companions. As the ages passed, creatures like miasis gave way to new forms. One such descendant, called Hesperocyon, appeared around 37 million years ago in what is now North America. Fossil evidence tells us that Hesperocyon looked somewhat like a cross between a fox and a civet, with a longer body and shorter legs than modern dogs. These early canids were already experimenting with the traits that would later define wolves and dogs: sharper teeth, better suited for meat, keen senses of smell, and the beginnings of pack-oriented behaviour. The climate of the Earth was shifting, forests giving way to open grasslands. With these changes came new prey animals, like ancient horses and deer-like mammals. To survive in such a world, early canids had to adapt. They grew longer legs, better for running, and more powerful jaws, better for seizing and tearing. Over millions of years, creatures such as Leptocyon emerged. This small, fox-like animal lived around 20 million years ago, and paleontologists consider it the direct ancestor of the true canines, animals whose descendants include wolves, jackals, foxes, and eventually dogs. Now, picture the world 5 to 7 million years ago. By this time, early humans were still far in the future, but the Earth was already home to ancestors of the grey wolf. Fossil records show that these early wolves lived in open environments, where endurance mattered more than speed alone. To pursue prey across long distances, they developed strong limbs, keen noses, and the social instincts that would later make them so extraordinary. Hunting in groups, they could wear down animals far larger than themselves. The seeds of cooperation, loyalty, and social hierarchy were already being planted deep in their lineage. As time moved forward into the Pleistocene epoch, roughly 2.5 million years ago, Earth entered a rhythm of advancing and retreating ice. The ice ages created vast landscapes of tundra and grassland, where herds of mammoths, bison, and reindeer roamed. Alongside them were powerful wolves, larger than those we know today, some with massive skulls and jaws capable of bringing down enormous prey. One of these was the dire wolf, Canis durus, a creature that lived across the Americas until about 10,000 years ago. Though often imagined as monstrous compared to modern wolves, dire wolves were not so different, slightly larger, with a heavier build, and specialised for tackling large Ice Age herbivores. But while dire wolves thrived for thousands of years, they were not the ones who would walk beside humans. Instead, it was the grey wolf, Canis lupus, that proved adaptable enough to survive shifting climates, dwindling prey, and new competition. The grey wolf's flexibility in hunting strategies, diet, and pack structure gave it an edge. Unlike dire wolves, which were highly dependent on large prey, grey wolves could hunt smaller animals, scavenge, and adjust their ways of living. That adaptability would prove crucial when a new force entered the landscape: humans. It is easy to imagine these wolves in the deep cold of the Ice Age, padding silently across snowfields, following the scent of reindeer herds. They howled to one another beneath glittering skies, maintaining bonds that kept the pack strong. Each wolf depended on the others for survival, from the alpha who led the hunt to the youngest pups who played at the den. This structure, this instinct to belong to a group, would later resonate deeply with another species that valued community: humans. When we think of wolves at this time, we must not imagine a single uniform animal, but rather a diverse array of wolf populations spread across continents. Some were larger, some smaller, some more aggressive, some more cautious. This variety would create the raw material for domestication later on, when certain wolves, those less fearful, those more curious, would begin approaching human camps. The story of wolves before humans is not simply a backdrop, but the essential foundation of everything to come. Without the long march of evolution, from Miasis in the forest to Hesperorheion on the plains, from Leptochion darting across grasslands to grey wolves shadowing mammoth herds, the dog as we know it could never have existed. Each stage shaped the instincts, bodies, and behaviours that would make wolves the perfect partners for humans. Yet at this point in history, no such partnership existed. The wolves of the Ice Age had no reason to think kindly of humans, and humans had no thought of taming wolves. Each species lived its life separately, occasionally crossing paths, often as competitors for the same prey. But time, patience, and necessity would slowly draw them together. As we drift gently toward that turning point, it is worth pausing to imagine the wolves themselves, their keen eyes glinting in moonlight, their breath steaming in the frigid air, their tracks pressed into snow beside the trails of great herds. They didn't know they stood on the edge of transformation. They only knew the rhythm of hunt and rest, of hunger and fulfillment, of loyalty to their pack. In that loyalty, in that instinct to belong and to share, lay the quiet beginning of the bond that would change both wolves and humans forever. As time moved forward into the Pleistocene epoch, roughly 2.5 million years ago, Earth entered a rhythm of advancing and retreating ice. The Ice Ages created vast landscapes of tundra and grassland, where herds of mammoths, bison, and reindeer roamed. Alongside them were powerful wolves, larger than those we know today, some with massive skulls and jaws capable of bringing down enormous prey. One of these was the dire wolf, Canis durus, a creature that lived across the Americas until about 10,000 years ago. Though often imagined as monstrous compared to modern wolves, dire wolves were not so different, slightly larger, with a heavier build, and specialised for tackling large Ice Age herbivores. But while dire wolves thrived for thousands of years, they were not the ones who would walk beside humans. Instead, it was the grey wolf, Canis lupus, that proved adaptable enough to survive shifting climates, dwindling prey, and new competition. The grey wolf's flexibility in hunting strategies, diet, and pack structure gave it an edge. Unlike dire wolves, which were highly dependent on large prey, grey wolves could hunt smaller animals, scavenge, and adjust their ways of living. That adaptability would prove crucial when a new force entered the landscape: humans. It is easy to imagine these wolves in the deep cold of the Ice Age, padding silently across snowfields, following the scent of reindeer herds. They howled to one another beneath glittering skies, maintaining bonds that kept the pack strong. Each wolf depended on the others for survival, from the alpha who led the hunt to the youngest pups who played at the den. This structure, this instinct to belong to a group, would later resonate deeply with another species that valued community: humans. When we think of wolves at this time, we must not imagine a single uniform animal, but rather a diverse array of wolf populations spread across continents. Some were larger, some smaller, some more aggressive, some more cautious. This variety would create the raw material for domestication later on, when certain wolves, those less fearful, those more curious, would begin approaching human camps. The story of wolves before humans is not simply a backdrop, but the essential foundation of everything to come. Without the long march of evolution, From Miasis in the forest to Hespercheion on the plains, from Leptochion darting across grasslands to grey wolves shadowing mammoth herds, the dog as we know it could never have existed. Each stage shaped the instincts, bodies and behaviours that would make wolves the perfect partners for humans. Yet at this point in history, no such partnership existed. The wolves of the Ice Age had no reason to think kindly of humans, and humans had no thought of taming wolves. Each species lived its life separately, occasionally crossing paths, often as competitors for the same prey. But time, patience, and necessity would slowly draw them together. As we drift gently toward that turning point, it is worth pausing to imagine the wolves themselves, their keen eyes glinting in moonlight, their breath steaming in the frigid air, their tracks pressed into snow beside the trails of great herds. They didn't know they stood on the edge of transformation. They only knew the rhythm of hunt and rest, of hunger and fulfillment, of loyalty to their pack. In that loyalty, in that instinct to belong and to share, lay the quiet beginning of the bond that would change both wolves and humans forever. The world of the Ice Age was vast, cold, and often unforgiving. Across frozen plains and open steppes, herds of great animals moved in restless patterns, searching for grazing land and shelter. Mammoths with shaggy coats lumbered slowly, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Bison gathered in dense herds, their heavy bodies warming one another as storms passed. Reindeer trod tirelessly across icy rivers, their hooves cracking the frozen surface. It was in this landscape that wolves thrived. They had grown into hunters uniquely suited to the rhythm of Ice Age life, able to run for long distances, able to smell prey from far away, able to work together to bring down animals larger than themselves. A lone wolf was vulnerable, but a pack of wolves could be unstoppable. Their howls echoed across valleys, both a warning to rivals and a reassurance to their own kind. Now, imagine that same world from the perspective of another species, humans. They too followed the herds, setting up temporary camps where food and water could be found. They too depended on cooperation, using not sharp teeth but sharp tools, carefully knapped from flint and obsidian. They hunted with spears, atlatls and cunning strategies, often working in groups to drive animals toward cliffs or into traps. For thousands of years, wolves and humans lived side by side, though not yet together. They were competitors, drawn to the same prey, sometimes clashing over carcasses, and yet, in their similarities, a strange potential was waiting. Both wolves and humans were highly social, both lived in groups, and both valued cooperation. They recognized patterns of behavior in one another. Wolves could see that humans worked as packs, much like they did. Humans could see that wolves were not only fierce but also loyal to their kind. At first, the encounters were likely tense. A wolf pack might shadow a group of hunters, hoping for scraps or a chance to steal meat. Humans, protective of their hard-won food, might throw stones or brandish fire to keep them away. But not all wolves reacted with the same intensity. Some were more aggressive, unwilling to risk coming close. Others, smaller, weaker, or simply more curious, lingered at a distance, watching the humans work. These were the wolves who, without knowing it, would take the first steps toward becoming something else. Archaeologists and geneticists believe this delicate relationship began at least 30,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. We cannot pinpoint the exact place, for it may have happened in multiple regions at once, across Europe, across Asia, anywhere humans and wolves crossed paths. What seems most likely is that the process was not sudden. Wolves did not one day wake up as dogs. Instead, over countless generations, tiny changes in behaviour shaped the path. Picture a campsite on a winter night. A fire crackles, sending sparks into the dark. Around the flames, humans huddle in furs, sharing roasted meat and stories that drift softly into the night air. Beyond the glow, eyes glimmer in the shadows. Wolves, watching, waiting. Some of them are bolder, edging nearer to the bones and scraps tossed aside. They snatch what they can before darting back into the darkness. For most humans, this was no more than a nuisance, but over time, patterns formed. The wolves that were slightly calmer, slightly less fearful, found it easier to approach. They received food without needing to hunt, a reward for their patience. The humans, though cautious, may have noticed benefits too. Wolves hovering near the edge of camp could alert them to danger. Strange footsteps, prowling predators, or even rival human groups. Over generations, the most nervous wolves stayed away, while the calmer ones drew nearer, their boldness rewarded with survival. This process, often called self-domestication, is thought to be one of the earliest steps in turning wolves into dogs. Unlike later selective breeding, where humans would deliberately choose traits, here the pressure came from circumstance. Wolves who could tolerate humans lived longer, reproduced more, and passed along their gentler temperaments. Bit by bit, their descendants grew different from their wilder kin. The humans too may have found advantages. A wolf lingering at camp was not only a scavenger, but also an extra pair of eyes and ears. They barked or growled when danger approached, acting as an early warning system. They might have followed hunting parties, drawn by the smell of blood, and in doing so they helped locate herds. Slowly, without intention, the partnership was forming. It is tempting to imagine an individual moment. The first time a human child tossed a scrap of meat to a waiting wolf, the first time a wolf wagged its tail instead of baring its teeth. But in truth, it was not one moment but many, repeated across generations, that built trust. Wolves became accustomed to firelight, to voices, to the scent of humans. Humans became accustomed to those glowing eyes at the edge of camp. The Ice Age world gave little room for waste, and every adaptation that improved survival mattered. Wolves learned that patience and gentleness could be as powerful as aggression. Humans learned that sharing with another species could strengthen their own safety. Out of necessity, a fragile thread of connection was spun. Over time, the wolves who lingered at camps grew subtly different. They became smaller than the great hunters who roamed far from humans. Their jaws shortened slightly, their temperaments softened. Their pups, born near humans, grew up less afraid of them. What had begun as scavenging was slowly turning into companionship. This early stage of domestication remains mysterious, but archaeological finds give us glimpses. Ancient wolf-like skulls have been unearthed that show shorter snouts and broader jaws, signs of change. Some burials from as early as 14,000 years ago include what appear to be dogs placed carefully beside humans, as if honoured in death as they had been valued in life. These burials suggest that by this time, the bond was more than practical, it had become emotional. But in the Ice Age, in those first encounters, the bond was still fragile, still forming. Wolves and humans walked parallel paths, sometimes clashing, sometimes cooperating, often hovering in that uncertain space between fear and trust. Each night, as fires burned and wolves howled under the stars, the future waited quietly in the dark. Neither species could have guessed that they were not only surviving together but reshaping one another's destinies. The story of wolves at the edge of human camps is not a tale of sudden domestication. It is a slow drift, a patient unfolding across centuries. What began as cautious scavenging would, little by little, become a partnership unlike any other in nature. For now, though, in the deep chill of the Ice Age, it was only the beginning, eyes glowing in the night, scraps thrown into the snow, and two species unknowingly drawing closer with every passing season. The Ice Age nights were long, cold, and often lonely. Humans huddled together under hides and furs gathered close to fires not only for warmth, but for comfort. Beyond the flicker of firelight, the darkness stretched endlessly, carrying with it the distant calls of animals, the shifting of the wind, and the constant sense that something unseen might be near. In that world, even the faintest companionship could feel like a gift. It was under these conditions that the first true friendships between humans and wolves began to take shape. Not the kind of friendship we imagine today, where a dog curls on a sofa or waits by a door, but something quieter, simpler, and deeply practical. It was a friendship built from trust earned over long seasons, scraps of food shared across the line between fear and curiosity, and the subtle recognition that each species offered the other something valuable. Picture a human encampment at the close of a long hunt. The people have worked together to bring down a deer. They have skinned it carefully, divided the meat, and placed the hides to dry. Children sleep close to the fire while elders keep a watchful eye. At the edge of the clearing a wolf lurks, thin from the winter, ribs showing faintly beneath its thick coat. Its yellow eyes watch each movement, not with open hostility, but with a patient hunger. A bone is tossed aside, carrying scraps of meat too small for humans to care about. The wolf creeps closer, ears twitching, paws silent in the snow. For a moment it risks everything, darting forward to seize the offering. It waits for the angry shout, the thrown stone, but none comes. Instead, the humans watch quietly, almost curiously, as the wolf carries its prize back into the dark. The next night, the wolf returns. Perhaps it brings with it a mate, or a pup, or another cautious member of its pack. Again, scraps are taken. Again, no harm comes. Slowly, a rhythm forms. The humans begin to expect the wolves at the edge of camp. The wolves begin to expect scraps near the fire. What began as chance becomes routine, and routine, over generations, hardens into trust. Trust was not instant, nor universal. Many wolves remained too aggressive, too dangerous, unwilling to tolerate human closeness. Many humans too saw wolves as threats and drove them away. But in certain places, under certain conditions, bonds deepened. The wolves that lingered were those with temperaments gentler than their wild cousins, and they passed those traits to their offspring. The humans who allowed their presence were those who saw the subtle benefits of tolerance. One of those benefits was warmth. A wolf drawn close to a fire resting near the edge of camp carried with it a body that radiated heat. In the bitter cold of Ice Age nights, when temperatures dropped so low that frost formed on beards and breath froze in the air, any extra warmth could mean survival. A wolf curled beside a sleeping human might at first have been tolerated as an accident, but soon it may have been welcomed. To share warmth was to share trust, and trust deepened with each quiet night spent side by side. Another benefit was protection. Wolves, ever alert, could sense danger long before humans noticed it. Their ears twitched at distant sounds, their noses caught faint scents on the wind, their growls carried warnings. A wolf that barked or howled at the approach of a predator, or at the movements of rival humans, was not only serving itself but also protecting the camp it lingered near. Humans began to see that these animals, once feared, could act as guardians. Food, warmth, and protection. These were the threads from which friendship was woven. Over time, something more intangible grew alongside them. Familiarity. A wolf that returned night after night, season after season, was no longer a stranger. Its habits became known, its presence expected. Hunters may have given it a name. Children may have watched it with fascination. Elders may have spoken of it as a spirit touched by something unusual. The wolf, too, grew accustomed to human voices, human smells, and the rhythm of human life. There may have been moments when the bond deepened further. A litter of wolf pups, born near a human camp, might have wandered close, playful and curious. A child, instead of fearing them, might have reached out a hand. In that instant, small, fleeting, almost invisible in the grand scope of history, the seed of companionship may have been planted. Pups raised near humans grew up with less fear, and in turn they were easier to live alongside. The cycle reinforced itself. Archaeological evidence suggests that this stage was already unfolding thousands of years ago. Some of the earliest dog-like remains show not only physical differences from wolves, shorter snouts, smaller teeth, but also signs of having lived closely with humans. Burials dating back over 14,000 years reveal dogs laid carefully beside people, as if mourned and honoured. Such gestures speak not only of utility but of affection. By then, wolves were no longer simply tolerated scavengers. They had become something more. Still, the early friendships were fragile. Wolves were powerful animals, capable of turning dangerous if hungry or threatened. Humans, wary of their strength, likely kept boundaries even as they allowed closeness. Yet the balance held, because each side gained something worth the risk. For wolves, humans were a source of steady food and shelter from harsher dangers. For humans, wolves were companions, guards, and perhaps even allies in the hunt. The bond between humans and wolves did not happen in a single leap, but in countless, almost invisible steps. Each step was shaped by necessity, by chance, and by the slow rhythm of generations. What began as a cautious truce at the edge of firelight gradually deepened into something more deliberate, more lasting. This was the beginning of domestication, the long process by which wolves transformed into dogs and by which humans too were changed. Domestication is not like the flick of a switch. It is more like a river carving a valley. Slowly, steadily, with time measured not in years but in centuries, traits were shaped, behaviours softened, and bonds strengthened. The wolves that dared to approach human camps were not the largest or fiercest. They were often the smaller ones, less threatening, less aggressive, and more willing to tolerate the nearness of people. Over generations, these traits became more common in the wolves that lingered at camps. They were selected not by human design, but by circumstance. Those who could live alongside humans survived. Those who could not disappeared. In this way, wolves began to domesticate themselves. The timid, the gentle, the curious, these were the animals who thrived in human company. Bit by bit, they became different from their wild cousins. Their bodies adapted, not only in size but in shape. Their skulls shortened, their teeth grew smaller, and their coats began to vary more widely in colour. Their temperaments shifted too. Where wild wolves relied on fear and aggression to secure survival, these proto-dogs found safety in patience, calmness, and trust. Humans, whether knowingly or not, reinforced this process. The pups that were easiest to handle were kept. The animals that barked warnings at night were valued. The ones who turned hostile were driven away or destroyed. In this way, a kind of early selection was at work. It was not breeding as we think of it today, with careful choices and recorded lineages, but a slower, subtler shaping. The animals best suited to life among humans survived and reproduced, while others did not. Over time, the changes grew more visible. The wolves that hovered at the edge of firelight became smaller than their wild cousins. Their ears may have grown floppier, their tails curlier, their faces softer. These physical changes were not just accidents. They were tied to the same shifts that made them more tolerant of humans. Scientists call this the domestication syndrome, a set of traits that often appear together when wild animals become tame. It happens because the process of selecting for gentleness and reduced fear also affects other parts of an animal's biology, from hormones to development, and so, without realizing it, humans were shaping a new kind of creature, one that looked and acted less like a wolf, and more like the dogs we know today. But domestication was not only about appearance, it was also about partnership. These early dogs began to play new roles in human life. They were not just scavengers anymore, they became guards, sounding alarms when danger approached. They became hunting companions, using their noses and speed to help track prey. They became helpers in ways large and small, filling spaces in human survival that no other animal could. Imagine a group of hunters setting out at dawn, following the faint tracks of reindeer across a frosted plain. Alongside them, a few wolf-like dogs trot eagerly, their heads low to the ground, their tails flicking. They catch scents invisible to the human nose, and they lead the hunters onward. When the prey is brought down, the dogs are rewarded with scraps, strengthening the cycle of trust. The humans gain food they might not have found on their own, and the dogs gain safety and nourishment. Each benefits, and the bond tightens. In camp, these animals were equally valuable. Their ears caught the softest footfalls, their noses sensed the faintest odours. Long before humans could detect a threat, the dogs were aware of it. They growled at predators circling in the night. They barked at strangers approaching the fire. They may even have kept rodents and scavengers at bay, protecting precious food stores. For humans, living always on the edge of hunger and danger, such services were no small gift. The dogs, in return, found more than food. They found a kind of family. Their instincts, honed through millennia of pack life, aligned easily with human groups. Just as wolves relied on one another, dogs began to rely on humans. They followed leaders, responded to signals, and accepted roles. For creatures built to live in packs, human communities felt strangely familiar. Humans too found comfort in this. They were no longer alone in the wild, but surrounded by companions who offered loyalty as well as service. Archaeological evidence suggests that this stage of domestication was well underway by 15,000 years ago, and perhaps even earlier. Sites from across Eurasia reveal dog-like remains buried alongside humans. In some graves, dogs were given the same care and respect as people. Their bones were arranged carefully, sometimes with ornaments or tokens. Such gestures tell us that these animals were not seen only as tools. They were companions, valued not just for what they did, but for who they were. The process of domestication also reshaped human life. With dogs at their side, people gained new advantages. Hunts became more efficient, camps became safer. The companionship of dogs may even have offered psychological comfort, easing the loneliness of long nights and dangerous journeys. Some anthropologists suggest that dogs may have helped humans expand into new environments, making survival easier in unfamiliar lands. If this is true, then dogs were not only shaped by humans, but also helped shape the course of human history. It is striking to think of how much was built from such simple beginnings. A scrap of food tossed into the snow, a pup raised in camp, a wolf that lingered near firelight, too curious to flee, too gentle to threaten. From these moments, a transformation began, slow and steady but unstoppable. Wolves became dogs, fear became trust, distance became closeness. By the end of this long stage, there were two kinds of wolves in the world. There were the wild ones, still fierce, still roaming forests and plains in search of prey. And there were the tame ones, smaller, calmer, tied to humans by bonds of food, warmth, and loyalty. Though they shared a common ancestor, their paths were diverging. One would remain wild, forever cautious of human presence. The other would walk into the heart of human life, never to turn back. This was domestication, not a single act, but a slow dance between species, shaped by necessity, softened by trust, and guided by time itself. And though it began in the shadows of the Ice Age, it would continue to deepen in the centuries that followed, as dogs found new roles in the lives of humans, and humans found in dogs something more than a companion, a partner. By the time the last great Ice Age began to ease its grip on the Earth, humans and their wolf-like companions had already walked side by side for many thousands of years. Glaciers retreated, rivers carved new paths through the land, and forests spread into places once barren and frozen. The world was changing, and with it the lives of both people and the dogs who had begun to share their existence. For the Stone Age hunter, life was never simple. Every day was a balance between hunger and plenty, danger and safety. The landscape was both provider and threat, offering food through its herds and plants, yet hiding predators in its shadows. In this setting, dogs became more than scavengers at the edge of campfires. They became trusted companions, woven into the daily rhythm of survival. Picture a band of hunters rising at dawn. The morning air is cool, damp with mist, and the grass is wet beneath their feet. In the half-light, shapes move quietly among them, lean, alert dogs, their breath steaming faintly. The hunters carry spears tipped with stone, while the dogs carry nothing but their senses. Together they begin the long trek toward the grazing lands where deer, boar or aurochs may be found. The hunters scan the ground for tracks. The dogs, noses close to the earth, pick up scents that no human could detect. They pause, ears flicking, tails twitching, then move forward, guiding the hunters in silence. Where once humans alone had to read the faintest signs of movement, now they had allies who could see with their noses, who could sense prey long before it was visible. When the hunt reached its climax, the dogs had their place as well. They might chase smaller animals, driving them toward hunters waiting in ambush. They might distract or harry larger prey, giving humans time to strike with spears or arrows. And when the kill was made, the dogs shared in the reward. Scraps of meat, bones heavy with marrow, a feast earned through cooperation. The relationship was no longer one of scavenger and giver, but of partners who worked together to survive. In the camp, the role of dogs was equally vital. They guarded the edges of settlements, their ears always listening, their noses always testing the wind. A low growl in the night could warn of predators circling too close. A sudden bark could rouse the camp when strangers approached. For people living in fragile shelters of wood, bone and hide, such early warnings were priceless. A dog was not only a companion, it was an alarm, a watchman, a shield against the dark. Archaeological discoveries tell us that even in these early times, people cared for their dogs in ways that went beyond practicality. In Bonn-Oberkassel, Germany, a burial site dating back over 14,000 years was discovered. Alongside the remains of two humans, archaeologists found the carefully placed body of a dog. Analysis showed that this animal had been sick, suffering from a disease that would have required care to survive as long as it did. That care could only have come from humans who fed it, protected it, and saw it as more than an expendable tool. In its grave, the dog was given honour, laid to rest as one of the group. This tells us something important. By the Stone Age, dogs were not only workers, but companions valued for themselves. They were mourned in death, cherished in life, and woven into the stories of human families. Children grew up alongside them. Hunters trusted them. Elders perhaps found comfort in their company. Dogs were no longer strangers at the firelight. They had moved into the circle, into the heart of human life. As the Ice Age ended and new environments emerged, dogs adapted alongside humans. Some lived in forests, where they helped track boar or deer. Others roamed open plains, chasing game across grasslands. Still others followed humans into mountains, riversides, and coastal regions, wherever survival took them. Their shapes and sizes may have begun to vary, reflecting the roles they played. A leaner dog might be prized for speed in the chase, while a sturdier one might be valued for guarding the camp. Over time, these variations would deepen, eventually giving rise to the diversity of breeds we know today. But in the Stone Age, the divisions were simple, each dog shaped by the work it did, by the land it lived upon, and by the humans who relied upon it. Beyond the practical, dogs also entered the spiritual lives of people. In many early cultures, animals were not seen as separate from the world of spirits, but as part of it. Wolves and dogs, with their piercing eyes and haunting howls, may have been regarded as messengers between realms. Some archaeologists believe that dogs buried with humans were not only companions but also guides into the afterlife, guardians for the soul's journey. If so, then the bond was more than earthly. It was sacred, stretching into the unseen. Daily life with dogs in the Stone Age was likely filled with small, quiet moments that reinforced the bond. A child feeding scraps to a pup, laughing as it licked their hand. A hunter resting at night, warmed not only by fire but by the body of a dog curled against him. An elder stroking the fur of a faithful companion, remembering hunts long past. These moments, repeated countless times across thousands of years, deepened the friendship until it became something unshakable. The Stone Age was long, stretching over millennia, and through all that time dogs remained at the side of humans. Together they endured hunger, cold, and danger. Together they shared warmth, food, and trust. And as human societies began to change, settling into villages, farming the land, building the first communities, dogs were there as well, ready to adapt, ready to find new roles. By the end of the Stone Age, the domestication of the dog was complete. What had begun as a fragile truce at the edge of a fire had become a partnership that no other animal has ever matched. Wolves who once howled in the darkness had transformed into dogs who lay beside children in sleep. The bond was no longer temporary, no longer uncertain. It was enduring, it was essential, and it would only deepen as humanity entered new ages of history. In the quiet rhythm of Stone Age life, hunts at dawn, fires at dusk, companionship through the long nights, the story of dogs and humans found its firm foundation. From here, the journey would continue into villages, cities, and civilizations, but always with the same truth at its core. Together, humans and dogs could do what neither could do alone. As the long Stone Age slowly gave way to new ways of living, humans began to change not only how they moved through the world, but how they stayed within it. For countless generations, people had wandered as hunters and gatherers, following herds, shifting with the seasons and carrying their homes on their backs. But gradually, here and there, small communities began to form, settlements that were not temporary, but places meant to last. These were the first villages, and with them came the quiet beginnings of farming, herding, and staying rooted to one place. And wherever the first villages arose, dogs settled into them as well. For dogs, village life brought new responsibilities. Where once they had roamed freely with hunters, joining in the chase across open plains, now they found themselves standing at the edges of human dwellings, watching, listening, protecting. The huts and homes of early farmers were fragile, built from wood, reeds, and mud. They needed watching just as much as the fields around them. Dogs, with their keen hearing and sense of smell, quickly became the sentinels of the village. Imagine an early farming community. Small clusters of huts, smoke rising faintly from cooking fires, the soft sounds of animals penned nearby. The villagers moved quietly in their work, tending to crops, weaving, shaping tools. And at the edge of the settlement, a dog lies in the dust, ears alert, nose raised to test the wind. The slightest movement in the grass, the faintest sound beyond the huts, and the dog is ready to bark, warning the people of what approaches. In this role, dogs became not only companions but protectors, guarding against both human and animal threats. Guarding the village was not their only role. With domesticated animals, sheep, goats, cattle, dogs found new tasks. Where once they had helped hunters track and chase wild herds, now they were called to guide, manage, and defend the animals that humans raised for food and clothing. It may have begun simply, with dogs helping to chase strays back into the herd, or driving animals from one pasture to another. Over time, these instincts were shaped and encouraged, laying the first foundations for herding dogs. The partnership between shepherd and dog, which would one day become a central feature of rural life across the world, had its quiet beginnings in these early villages. Life in a village was very different from life in a camp. It was steadier, more predictable, but also more vulnerable. A camp could move if danger came, a village could not. That made dogs more valuable still. A low growl at night might mean that wolves, once their wild cousins, circled the edge of the fields. A sharp bark might send away thieves. In places where people stored food, whether in pits, baskets, or jars, dogs may have also helped keep away scavengers, foxes, wild cats, and other intruders who smelled the grain and meat. The presence of dogs in villages was not only practical but emotional. In the bustle of daily life, children likely played with them, just as children do today. Puppies grew up under human care, becoming accustomed to voices, gestures, and routines. The bond between people and dogs, already strong in the hunting bands of the Stone Age, deepened further in the close-knit spaces of the village. A dog became a familiar presence at every threshold, every gathering, every field's edge. Archaeology gives us glimpses into this world. Across early farming sites in the Fertile Crescent, in Europe and in Asia, the bones of dogs appear alongside those of domesticated livestock. Sometimes they are found in burials, laid carefully as if honoured in death. Other times they appear in refuse pits, suggesting a life fully integrated with human communities. In some sites, paw prints have even been found hardened into ancient clay, left behind by a dog that wandered across drying tiles or vessels, just as modern dogs leave tracks across wet ground or newly poured concrete. These prints are small, fleeting records, but they remind us that the presence of dogs was not abstract. It was daily, ordinary, and constant. Dogs also likely became woven into the myths and beliefs of village life. As protectors, they may have been symbols of safety, standing between the known world of the hearth and the unknown world beyond. Some early cultures placed dogs in spiritual roles, imagining them as guardians of the home, the fields, or even the afterlife. In some later traditions, echoes of this role survive. Dogs as companions of gods, or as watchers at the boundary between life and death. Though much of this cannot be traced with certainty in the very earliest villages, the seeds of such ideas were likely planted there, in the everyday closeness between people and dogs. The partnership was not one-sided. Humans gave dogs food, shelter, and protection. Dogs gave humans loyalty, work, and watchfulness. This mutual benefit strengthened over generations, until dogs were no longer thought of as outsiders who had joined humans, but as insiders, part of the very identity of a community. A village was not whole without its people, its animals, its crops, and its dogs. Over time, as villages grew larger and agriculture spread, dogs may have begun to diverge in shape and role even more. Those best suited for guarding were kept and bred, passing on their traits. Those better at herding or helping with the chase of small animals may have been favoured for other tasks. Slowly, the diversity of dogs increased, though the concept of formal breeds was still far in the future. What mattered most was not appearance, but ability. The dog that could serve the needs of its people was the dog that thrived. In these early villages, we can see the outlines of the roles that dogs would hold for thousands of years to come. The guard at the gate, the shepherd's helper, the child's companion, the loyal friend whose bark breaks the silence of night, whose presence makes a house or a hut feel like a home. From the wild edges of ancient forests to the doorways of humanity's first permanent homes, dogs had walked the long path into human life and had found a place that was theirs to keep. And so, as farming spread, as villages grew into towns and towns into cities, dogs continued to walk beside people. The world was changing yet again, and with it new roles would emerge. No longer simply hunters or guards, dogs would become part of civilizations themselves, appearing in art, myth, and daily life across the great cultures of the ancient world. But their place in those grand stories rested on the quiet foundation laid in the first villages, where they learned to live not just beside humans but with them, as partners in work, protectors of homes and companions in the simple flow of daily existence. As the centuries passed and small farming villages spread into wider landscapes, the simple settlements of early humanity gave rise to something larger and more complex. Villages grew into towns, and towns into the first cities. With these cities came writing, trade, temples, and laws. The dawn of civilization reshaped human life, and dogs, who had already taken their place beside people, entered this new world with them. No longer were they just companions on the hunt, or guardians of quiet villages. In the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt and Greece, dogs became symbols, workers, guardians, and sometimes even sacred beings. Their partnership with humans deepened, woven into the very fabric of these cultures. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the world's first great cities rose from the floodplains. Here, thousands of years before the Common Era, humans learned to irrigate fields, build temples of mud brick, and inscribe laws on clay tablets. In this structured world, dogs continued to serve their ancient roles. They guarded homes, herded animals, and accompanied hunters into the marshes and fields. Their loyalty and usefulness were so central that they found a place in Mesopotamian mythology. One of the great goddesses, Gula, often associated with healing, was frequently depicted with dogs at her side. Clay figurines of dogs have been discovered buried beneath thresholds and foundations, placed there as guardians against evil. It seems that people believed a dog's watchfulness did not end with the physical. It extended into the spiritual, keeping harm away from both homes and souls. The art of Mesopotamia sometimes shows lean, muscular dogs with cropped ears, animals that suggest early mastiff-like types. These were powerful guardians, suited to both protecting herds and standing watch over gates. The practical and the symbolic overlapped. A dog might bark to warn of intruders, but it also stood as a living symbol of protection, a being that kept the boundary between inside and outside, safety and danger. In the crowded, bustling streets of Mesopotamian cities, dogs reminded people of their connection to nature, to loyalty, and to the guardianship of home. Further west and south, in Egypt, the relationship between humans and dogs took on another form. Along the banks of the Nile, life followed the rhythm of the flooding river. The people of Egypt built great stone monuments, carved delicate jewellery, and painted scenes of daily life onto tomb walls. Within these depictions, dogs appear often. In hunting scenes, sleek hounds chase antelope and gazelle, their bodies lean and elegant, much like the Salukis and greyhounds that still run across deserts today. These dogs were not only practical hunting companions, but also companions of status, kept by nobles and pharaohs alike. Dogs in Egypt were sometimes given collars, crafted from leather and decorated with inscriptions. Archaeologists have found remains of dogs buried carefully, some with their masters, others with names recorded for eternity. To give a dog a burial was to acknowledge its place not just in life, but in memory. The Egyptians, who believed so deeply in the afterlife, seemed to imagine that a faithful dog might walk beside its owner, even in the world beyond death. In their art and tombs, dogs appear as creatures of grace, symbols of companionship and loyalty. The god Anubis, one of the most enduring figures in Egyptian belief, was represented with the head of a jackal or dog-like animal. Though more closely linked to jackals than domestic dogs, Anubis reflects the powerful association between canines and the mysteries of death, protection, and passage into the next world. The dog, or dog-like figure, was not merely an animal of the earth, but a guide between realms. In daily life, Egyptians loved their dogs as hunters and companions. In their spiritual imagination, they raised them to symbols of the divine. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean in Greece, the presence of dogs was also significant. Ancient Greek literature and myth are filled with references to them. The poet Homer, in the Odyssey, wrote of Argos, the faithful hound who waited 20 years for his master Odysseus to return home, recognizing him even when no one else did. Argos lies down and dies after seeing his master once more, a tale that captures the essence of canine loyalty in one of the world's oldest stories. For the Greeks, the dog was the embodiment of devotion, a living emblem of faithfulness across years and trials. Greek art also depicts dogs, often in the company of hunters. They appear on pottery, chasing deer and boar alongside their masters, lean and swift, their forms captured in motion. In Greek households, dogs guarded courtyards, alerting families to danger. In the world of philosophy and thought, the dog even gave its name to a famous school, the Cynics, whose name comes from the Greek kynikos, meaning dog-like. To the Greeks, the dog was not only a companion in the hunt and the home, but a symbol woven into their language, their myths, and their ideas. Dogs also appeared in the underworld myths of Greece. The most famous of these is Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guarded the gates of Hades, preventing the dead from leaving and the living from entering. Cerberus was fearsome, a monstrous exaggeration of the protective role that real dogs played in everyday life. Just as dogs guarded the doorways of homes and villages, so too, in Greek imagination, a dog guarded the doorway to the realm of the dead. Across these ancient civilizations, the dog was many things at once: hunter, guard, companion, symbol, and sacred figure. Its place in human life was secure, not only in practical terms, but in cultural imagination. In Mesopotamia, the dog was tied to healing and protection. In Egypt, it was a beloved companion and a link to the divine. In Greece, it was loyalty itself, the faithful friend and the mythic guardian of the underworld. Yet beneath all these roles, the essence remained the same. Dogs lived with people. They ate at their fires, ran beside them in the fields, watched over their homes, and were remembered in their stories. Civilization had grown vast and complex, filled with temples and palaces, but the bond between dog and human was still simple, still rooted in the quiet companionship of daily life. And as these great cultures flourished, fell, and passed into history, dogs continued to travel with humanity. They would walk the roads of Rome, serve the lords of medieval Europe, and sit beside peasants in cottages. But their time in the ancient world left an imprint that would never fade. Even today, when people think of loyalty, guardianship, or companionship, the images that come to mind of faithful hounds, of protective guardians, of loving pets, echo the beliefs, stories, and practices shaped thousands of years ago in the lands of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. As human societies grew and spread across the continents, the stories they told about themselves grew too. People explained the world not only with practical knowledge, through farming, trade, and law, but also with myths, legends, and tales. These stories gave meaning to life's mysteries, to the cycles of birth and death, and to the forces of nature that could not be controlled. And woven into these myths, again and again, appears the figure of the dog, not just as a hunter or guardian, but as a creature with a special link to the unseen world, a being that walked between realms of the living and the dead, the ordinary and the divine. In many cultures, dogs were seen as guides. Perhaps this arose from their nature, always alert, always watching, always running ahead to scout paths. A dog could find a trail in the dark, follow scents invisible to humans, and sense dangers before they arrived. To people who lived close to the land, such abilities felt more than natural. They felt almost supernatural. And so, in myth, dogs often became psychopomps, guides for the soul after death, protectors who would ensure safe passage from this world to whatever lay beyond. In ancient Egypt, this role was embodied by Anubis, the jackal-headed god who presided over mummification and guarded tombs. Though linked to jackals rather than domestic dogs, Anubis reflected the same qualities people saw in their canine companions: watchfulness, guardianship, and the ability to cross boundaries. Just as a dog guarded the threshold of a home, Anubis guarded the threshold of the afterlife. In funerary rites, the presence of canine imagery reminded mourners that their loved ones would be protected, guided, and not left alone on their journey. In Greece, the story of Cerberus served a similar purpose. Cerberus, with his 3 heads and serpent tail, stood at the gates of Hades. His task was to keep the living from entering and the dead from leaving. Though monstrous in appearance, his role was familiar. He was the ultimate guard dog, stationed at the most important threshold of all. Myths tell of how heroes like Heracles and Orpheus confronted him, but in each telling, the presence of a dog at that liminal space remained constant. It was a recognition, perhaps, that in life dogs already stood watch at doorways, fields and roads, and so in imagination they must naturally guard the greatest passage of all. Among the ancient Persians, in the faith of Zoroastrianism, dogs were seen as holy animals. Texts describe rituals where dogs were present during funerals, believed to help ward off evil spirits that might trouble the soul of the departed. The dog's ability to sense what humans could not, whether danger, scent, or sound, was extended into the spiritual realm. It was thought that no demon could pass unnoticed by a dog's gaze. The watchful eyes of dogs became more than a physical trait. They were seen as eyes that pierced into the unseen. Farther east, in India, dogs also appear in sacred traditions. In Hindu mythology, Yama, the god of death, is often said to have 2 4-eyed dogs that guard the path to his realm. These dogs not only guard but guide souls, ensuring that the journey is completed safely. In everyday life, Indian texts both warn against mistreating dogs and describe them as loyal creatures deserving respect. In the epic Mahabharata, the hero Yudhishthira is tested when a dog follows him faithfully on his final journey. When asked to abandon the dog in order to enter heaven, Yudhishthira refuses, declaring that loyalty cannot be betrayed. For this act of faithfulness, the dog is revealed to be a divine form in disguise. In this story, the dog is both companion and tester of human virtue, reminding people that loyalty goes both ways. In Norse mythology, dogs and wolves appear often, their roles sometimes blurred. The monstrous wolves Fenrir, Skjöll, and Hati symbolize chaos and cosmic danger, while other hounds like Garm guard the underworld. Garm, chained at the entrance to hell, is often compared to Cerberus. Though frightening, his role is familiar. A guardian at the boundary between life and death. Even in lands of snow and storm, where people told tales of gods and giants, the image of the dog remained constant. Always at the threshold, always guarding, always loyal to its role. Across the ocean, in the Americas, indigenous cultures also held dogs in reverence. The Maya, for instance, believed that dogs could guide souls through the dangerous rivers and obstacles of the underworld known as Xibalba. Archaeological finds of dog burials suggest that dogs were intentionally placed with the dead, their spirits entrusted with the duty of guiding their human companions. In the harsh landscapes of Mesoamerica, where survival was never guaranteed, the companionship of dogs was so vital that even in death people wished to keep them near. In the myths of the Inuit, dogs were also deeply valued. Living in Arctic regions where sled dogs were central to survival, these animals became linked with stories of creation and endurance. Dogs pulled not only sleds, but the weight of cultural imagination, symbols of resilience in a frozen world. In some tales, dogs even bridge the gap between human and spirit worlds, helping shamans in their journeys beyond ordinary reality. What unites these myths across continents is the recurring vision of the dog as more than just an animal of flesh and bone. In stories they became guardians, companions, guides, and sometimes even gods. Yet at the heart of each myth lies a simple truth drawn from daily life. Dogs stayed with people. They guarded campsites, they followed hunters, they lay at the door of the house. From this constant companionship arose the belief that they would remain at one's side even after death. The power of myth is that it magnifies what is already present. The loyalty of a dog in life became the loyalty of a dog in legend. Its protection at the hearth became protection at the gates of the afterlife. Its watchful eyes in the night became eyes that saw into the world beyond. In this way, human imagination honoured what humans already knew, that the bond with dogs was one of the most enduring connections in the world. Even today, when people tell stories of dogs who wait by roadsides for owners who never return, or who travel incredible distances to find their way home, they echo the same themes told thousands of years ago. The myths may belong to ancient cultures, but the essence remains unchanged. The dog is still seen as a guide, a protector, and above all, a companion whose loyalty transcends the boundaries of life itself. When the Roman Empire spread across Europe, North Africa and the Middle East, it carried with it not only armies, roads and laws, but also animals. Among them, dogs held a steady place. To the Romans, dogs were more than companions. They were workers, protectors, symbols of loyalty and even parts of their entertainment. Their empire's vastness meant that Roman dogs became some of the first truly widespread breeds, their influence spreading to the far corners of Europe and beyond. Roman households, whether modest apartments in crowded cities or villas in the countryside, often kept dogs for protection. In Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered mosaics with the words "Cav Canem," beware of the dog, set at the threshold of homes. These mosaics served as both warning and decoration, reminding visitors that a faithful animal guarded the entry. The idea of the watchdog, already ancient, was here given a distinctly Roman expression, the dog as both literal guardian and symbolic emblem of vigilance. Yet not all dogs in Roman households were large and fearsome. Many were small lapdogs, bred for companionship, warmth and comfort. Writers of the time described them sitting in the laps of noblewomen or carried in arms through gardens. These little dogs, often imported from the East, were pampered in ways that would feel familiar today. They had names, collars, and even epitaphs when they died. One inscription reads tenderly, "To Helena, my dear little dog, who never barked without reason." Such words remind us that love for pets is far from a modern invention. Beyond the household, dogs were central to Roman work and leisure. Shepherd dogs guarded flocks across the empire's vast pastoral lands. Large Molossian hounds, famed for their size and strength, were used not only for guarding, but also in war. Roman legions sometimes marched with dogs trained to attack, their presence adding both practical defence and psychological weight to the army's image. These war dogs wore spiked collars or even simple armour, their ferocity magnified by the discipline of the soldiers around them. The Romans also loved spectacle, and in the arenas of the Colosseum and amphitheatres across the empire, dogs took part. Sometimes they were pitted against wild animals like lions and bears, sometimes against each other, sometimes against condemned criminals. These brutal entertainments remind us of the darker side of Roman culture, where animals were often used as tools for public amusement. Yet, despite this cruelty, the same society could revere dogs as symbols of loyalty, guardianship, and even spiritual guides. The contrast reveals the many roles dogs played, sometimes noble, sometimes tragic, but always close to human life. Hunting was another sphere where dogs excelled. Roman elites valued the chase as a sport, and hunting dogs were bred and trained for speed, endurance, and scent. Some were swift coursing hounds, ancestors of greyhounds, chasing deer and hares across open fields. Others were scenting hounds, skilled at tracking boar through forests. Hunting with dogs was not only practical, but also deeply cultural, a pastime that reinforced ideas of power, control, and harmony with nature. The paintings, mosaics, and texts that survive from Roman times show dogs beside hunters, frozen in motion, always active, always vital to the chase. Roman literature is filled with references to dogs. The poet Virgil, in the Georgics, describes the traits of good hunting hounds, praising their noses, stamina, and courage. Columella, a writer on agriculture, offers practical advice for choosing and training dogs for farm work. These accounts give us a glimpse of Roman thinking. Dogs were seen not as luxuries but as necessary partners in the management of land, animals and households. Their roles were varied and their usefulness unquestioned. Religion and symbolism also wove dogs into Roman life. The goddess Diana, patron of the hunt, was often depicted with hounds at her side. Her dogs represented not only hunting skill, but also loyalty to the goddess herself. Similarly, dogs appeared in funerary art, sometimes carved beside tombs as eternal guardians for the dead. Just as in earlier cultures, the dog was seen as a threshold companion, present at both the doors of houses and the gates of the afterlife. As the late medieval world gave way to the dawn of global exploration, dogs, ever faithful to human journeys, found themselves drawn into a new chapter of history. No longer confined to villages, castles, or farms of Europe, they began to cross oceans. They sailed on caravels and galleons, endured storms and strange new climates, and arrived on shores far from the lands where they had first evolved. The age of exploration was a human story of courage, ambition, trade, and conquest. But it was also a story in which dogs were constant companions. The great seafaring nations of Europe, Spain, Portugal, later England, France, and the Netherlands, launched expeditions to Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Their ships were crowded with sailors, supplies, livestock, and often dogs. Dogs served practical purposes on these voyages. They guarded food stores against rats, provided companionship on long months at sea, and sometimes even hunted on newly reached islands to supply fresh meat. A dog on deck was not unusual. Their loyalty and sharp senses made them valuable members of the crew. Spanish conquistadors, in particular, recognized the power of dogs as tools of conquest. Large mastiff-like war dogs were carried to the Americas, where they were used to intimidate and control indigenous peoples. Accounts describe them being unleashed in battle, their size and aggression terrifying those who had never seen such animals before. In grim detail, chroniclers note that these dogs were trained for war, wearing spiked collars, charging into conflict alongside men. It is a darker aspect of the canine story, one where their loyalty was harnessed for violence in the service of empire. Yet dogs in the New World also served less brutal roles. Some became hunting companions in the forests of the Americas, helping Europeans adapt to unfamiliar landscapes. Others were guards in the growing settlements, protecting colonists from danger. And in time, dogs mingled with local canines, creating new varieties and shaping the gene pool of the Americas. The mixing of Old World and New World animals mirrored the mixing of cultures, foods, and diseases that defined this era of contact. Indigenous peoples themselves already had traditions of dogs long before European arrival. In the Americas, native dogs served as hunters, guardians, and companions. The Mexican hairless dog, the Xoloitzcuintli, had a history stretching back thousands of years. Revered by the Aztecs and other Mesoamerican cultures, it was believed to guide souls through the underworld. In North America, breeds like the Inuit sled dogs were essential for survival in Arctic regions, pulling loads across frozen landscapes. These dogs, adapted to their environments, met European breeds with the arrival of colonists, and together they began new evolutionary paths. In Africa, too, exploration and colonization brought changes. Portuguese traders and settlers encountered native breeds like the Basenji, a small intelligent hunting dog known for its unusual yodel-like call. Dogs of Africa were resilient, adapted to hot climates, skilled at guarding and tracking. When European dogs were introduced, some mingled, creating hybrids that blended traits from both continents. These dogs became part of colonial settlements and trade networks, moving with humans as they reshaped the continent. On the ships of explorers heading east to Asia, dogs were sometimes carried as gifts or trade items. In China and Japan, small lapdogs had long histories of selective breeding, associated with nobility and refinement. The meeting of European and Asian traditions led to exchanges that would later introduce breeds like the Pekingese and Shih Tzu to Western courts. What had once been isolated lineages began to spread more widely, connecting canine history into a global web. The age of exploration also created a new awareness of diversity among dogs. Travellers and naturalists described the strange dogs they encountered: hairless ones in the Americas, small barking hunters in Africa, regal companions in Asia. These reports, written in journals and letters, fascinated readers back home. Dogs became symbols not only of loyalty, but also of exoticism, creatures that represented the faraway places Europeans were beginning to imagine and understand. In the colonies themselves, dogs reflected the layered structure of society. Wealthy settlers imported purebred dogs from Europe, often for hunting or display. Farmers and common folk relied on mixed-breed dogs, bred for utility rather than pedigree, guarding fields, herding livestock, and providing protection. Among enslaved peoples and indigenous communities, dogs remained close, part of daily life, sometimes a rare comfort in harsh conditions. The presence of dogs in all these layers shows how universal their bond with humans had become. No class, no culture, no geography seemed untouched by it. As exploration gave way to colonization, the role of dogs in empire building became clearer. They were tools of settlement, helping humans adapt to new worlds. They were instruments of war, feared and formidable. They were companions, easing loneliness in faraway lands. They were also symbols, sometimes representing European power, other times embodying resilience in indigenous traditions. Each of these roles was shaped by the movement of people and the expanding map of the known world. In this period, dogs also began to accompany humans on scientific voyages. Naturalists and explorers documented not only lands and plants, but also animals. Dogs, as familiar creatures, provided points of comparison. Observations of native dogs were carefully recorded, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with prejudice, but always with curiosity. The global cataloguing of life included them, and they too became part of the story of discovery. On lonely outposts, whether a fort in the Caribbean, a mission in South America, or a trading station on the African coast, dogs were often the most constant of companions. Letters from colonists described their loyalty, their help in the hunt, their watchfulness at night. In distant and sometimes hostile places, a dog at one's side could mean security and a reminder of home. This emotional bond, already ancient, grew stronger as humans pushed into unfamiliar frontiers. By the 17th century, dogs had become truly global. No longer confined to the regions of their early domestication, they were now present on every continent humans reached. They had crossed oceans, endured hardships, and adapted to countless environments. They were part of conquest and part of settlement, part of cruelty and part of comfort. Their story, like that of humans, had become worldwide. As this age flowed into the 18th century, the dog stood at a threshold. The coming centuries would bring scientific breeding, the rise of kennel clubs, and a new fascination with purity of line. But in the age of exploration, dogs were above all versatile survivors, adapting alongside humans to the great currents of history. They were explorers too, though not by choice, crossing seas, entering jungles, standing on strange shores. And wherever they went, they found new ways to remain indispensable, faithful to their old role as partners in the human journey. As the 19th century unfolded, the Industrial Revolution reshaped not only cities and machines, but also the role of dogs in daily life. With more people moving into urban centres, dogs were no longer only herders or hunters. Instead, they became companions in crowded streets and homes, adjusting to the rhythms of modern life. In these growing cities, the image of the dog shifted steadily from working partner to household friend. The rise of dog shows and kennel clubs gave a new direction to their story. In England, the Kennel Club was established in 1873, formalising the classification of breeds. Breeding, once focused mostly on utility, now began to emphasise appearance and pedigree. The Victorian fascination with cataloguing and order extended to dogs, creating the idea of purebred animals. Some breeds were refined for elegance, while others were carefully preserved for their working skills. This era also highlighted the growing diversity of canine roles. Police forces experimented with dogs for patrol work, while others served as guide animals for the blind. Breeds like the Saint. Bernard became symbols of rescue and service. At the same time, small lapdogs grew popular among the middle and upper classes, valued less for labour and more for companionship and status. The bond between human and dog deepened, now framed by both affection and social display. In literature and art, dogs appeared as faithful symbols of loyalty and comfort. Paintings showed them curled beside firesides or loyally walking beside workers. Stories of brave rescues and loyal companions reinforced their cultural importance. The image of the dog as man's best friend, though ancient in reality, found new life in the industrial age. They were no longer just helpers in survival, but figures of emotional connection in a rapidly changing world. By the end of the century, dogs were firmly embedded in modern society. They had become urban citizens, rural workers, and cherished companions. Industry had brought noise, smoke, and machines, but it had also brought the dog closer to the human heart, Their journey, which began beside ancient campfires, now continued beside factory chimneys and crowded streets, where their presence softened the edges of industrial life. The world of the 20th century brought challenges unlike any before, and dogs, as they had done for thousands of years, adapted to the changing needs of humankind. When the First World War broke out in 1914, the vast machinery of the modern conflict swept across Europe. Yet in the chaos of trenches, mud, and barbed wire, dogs became quiet partners of soldiers. They carried messages through gunfire, weaving across battlefields where human messengers might have been too slow. They pulled small carts of supplies, and some worked as medics' helpers, carrying bandages or even guiding the wounded back towards safety. To the men who fought, these animals were more than tools. They were reminders of loyalty and life in a world gone cold and mechanical. In the Second World War, their role only deepened. Across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, dogs were trained for guard duty, detection, and rescue. Some parachuted alongside soldiers, while others worked with resistance groups in occupied territories. On both sides of the conflict, they stood watch, their ears alert in the silence before raids or attacks. Dogs sniffed out mines, carried messages through forests, and searched for survivors beneath rubble after bombings. In grim times, they brought comfort to weary soldiers who missed their families, sitting quietly by campfires or in barracks, listening without judgment. The stories of individual dogs became symbols of hope. In Britain, a terrier named Rip rescued dozens of people from bombed buildings during the Blitz. In America, a German shepherd mix named Chips served with distinction in campaigns across Europe and North Africa. Soviet forces trained entire units of dogs, some tasked with carrying supplies, others with defending positions. Their courage was not always recognized in the way human bravery was, but to those who fought alongside them, they were comrades. War also forced civilians to reconsider the place of dogs in society. In cities under bombing, many families relied on their animals as guards and companions. Others faced the heartbreak of leaving them behind during evacuations or shortages. Yet even in these times, the bond between humans and dogs proved resilient. After battles ended and soldiers returned home, many brought back memories not only of hardship, but also of the quiet loyalty of a dog who had shared the long nights of uncertainty. By the close of the Second World War, dogs had shown themselves once again as partners in survival. They had adapted to a world of trenches, tanks, and planes, just as they once adapted to the campfires of the Ice Age. From muddy battlefields to ruined cities, they remained steady companions, embodying both resilience and devotion. In their presence, the harshness of war softened, if only slightly, reminding people that even in the darkest hours, loyalty and friendship could endure. The story of dogs is, in many ways, the story of us. From the first moments when a wolf lingered near the light of a fire, to the present day where millions of households call a dog part of the family, their journey has been entwined with ours. They adapted to our shifting worlds, ice and snow, fields and villages, cities and wars, changing as we changed, yet always keeping a place beside us. Over tens of thousands of years, dogs have worn many roles. They were hunters in the wilderness, herders on open fields, guardians at the edge of villages, and rescuers in moments of danger. They became companions, friends, and family. Each role reflected not only their loyalty, but also our need for connection. The bond that grew between human and dog was never just practical. It was emotional, steady, and deeply woven into the rhythm of life. In their eyes, people often see trust. In their presence, people find comfort. Whether curled beside a fire in a cave thousands of years ago, or sleeping quietly on the floor of a modern home, dogs carry with them a reminder of continuity. They remind us that in a world of constant change, some bonds endure with remarkable strength. Even today, as science uncovers more about genetics and history, the mystery of that first companionship still lingers. Why did wolves choose us, and why did we choose them? The answers may never be complete, but the outcome is plain to see. Together, humans and dogs built a partnership that shaped both species in ways neither could have managed alone. And so, as the story of their evolution continues into the future, the lesson remains simple. In loyalty, in patience, in companionship, dogs have always been there. Faithful travellers on the long path of human history, Their journey with us is not yet finished, and perhaps it never will be, for wherever people go, it seems a dog will walk beside them,